Welcome to the Guiding Grief podcast. Today we have two incredible guests. Our guests come to us from Hospice of the Valley, San Jose, a division of Sutter Care at home. Kristina Swanson, who is a bereavement coordinator with years of experience in guiding families through loss and more importantly before loss. And then also Amy Daly, who is also a bereavement counselor. And we are honored to have you on Guiding Grief to share your expertise. And today our focus is making sure that we have an opportunity to use this platform to talk to individuals about preparing themselves for the holidays. Halloween is around the corner. A lot of the times we jump all the way to Christmas is the big holiday, but there are so many traditions that we have, and things like Halloween and Thanksgiving and Dia de los Muertos, I want to make sure I say it correctly, amongst so many others. And especially when birthdays and anniversaries are smattered within that period of time, it makes it incredibly difficult. And in your expertise, that's going to be our goal today, is to share a little bit about that and how Hospice of the Valley in San Jose helps to guide families and provide them access to care and, more importantly, a place to be heard. So for the both of you, and whoever comes first, is my first opportunity to talk to two professionals at the same time. What are the most common concerns that come up with clients regarding the holidays?
So I think what's important to point out is what holiday season really means for people. Mm-hmm. And so when we think of holidays, we think of togetherness, a time of family, a time of sharing, a time to give thanks. And when someone is grieving, oftentimes they're feeling lonely and an emptiness. And so that same joy that surrounds the holidays is not there.
And they can feel that emptiness even with a full home.
Yes,
full of
absolutely,
people, right?
Absolutely. Because they're just missing one key person. That might have been the matriarch or the patriarch of the family who kind of brought the family together, for the traditions. So I think the most common questions are, is it okay if we do things differently? Mm-hmm. Do we keep traditions? How do we manage, expectations of others? They think we should be doing something, and I'm not feeling like I can. And what do we do if there are young children in the home? How do we keep the joy for them?
Right. How do we relate and make sure that there's some continuity of those events without taking pause and remembering that the person is not with us? What is important to you in your encounters, Amy, as it relates to it?
Yeah, I think that it's important to give permission to the grievers to allow themselves to give permission to themselves that it's okay to say no, it's okay to not do the same things that you did before necessarily. And so there's a lot of that, just giving permission.
Right. I think we're always looking for that level, but I don't think people know how to find that permission. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the one wonderful thing about Hospice of the Valley in San Jose, is that if you have that encounter, and based on your expertise and your time in your field, that if someone has an opportunity to speak to someone like yourselves, that's where they get access maybe to the permission, because internally they're thinking, I shouldn't be happy.
It's just the tape recording of the shoulds. I should be doing this. I shouldn't be feeling this
right.
way. So to have a place or a platform to explore those feelings, so they can then feel, I can give myself permission. It's okay that I do things differently, but how am I then going to communicate that to my family? And so I think then that's where other conversations happen on how to be supportive to everyone that's grieving mm-hmm. loss. And we go into some more examples, but I think those are the primary questions that we start hearing now, especially as we're leading into
the lead up is so important, because if given permission early, if
yes.
access, and they've entertained the idea that I'm about to embark on something either for the first time or the second time, or the 20th time
Yeah.
that maybe they needed permission and they've never found it. And maybe I should provide a quick interjection as it relates to Hospice of the Valley in San Jose, that it's not just Hospice of the Valley that's caring for an individual under hospice care, but the level of grief counseling you provide, and maybe you could touch on that and the services.
So we not only provide counseling to our hospice families, we do provide counseling services to the community. So anybody that's experienced loss can utilize our services, individual or group counseling, and then events such as preparing for the holidays. We have annual memorial throughout the year, and all of those are no cost. So we are available to support anybody grieving, not just a hospice family member. I think that's really valuable because it gives a place for people, who may not necessarily or may not have ever necessarily gone to traditional counseling, so to speak, but the loss has really challenged them, and other life stressors. Coming to talk to us as licensed professionals gives them the tools they need to cope, and not just during holiday time, but this is the time that's really overwhelming. And just to go back what you said, we do this early to help with the planning, because it's not just about the day, it's the lead up that's overwhelming. How am I going to be? How are we going to be? What are we going to do? And as you begin to plan through that, the day itself is manageable. And so it's giving the time to communicate with family members, to compromise and come up with new ideas, new traditions, if that's what is desired. And so I think that framework of having the conversations early is really important.
Something you've touched on that I find is super important, and my Aunt Dee actually has mentioned this, that some people look at therapy and they say to themselves, oh, that's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
And she always said, well, if you've got a vehicle, your car needs a tune-up out every now and again. And getting a tune-up and having a conversation with yourselves or someone at Hospice of the Valley or somewhere else. But you're searching for individuals to help. And people think of the day, it's Christmas Day, what am I supposed to do? It's not just Christmas Day. It's pulling that box out of wherever you keep it. Yeah. And whether it's tinsel in 1987 or, a frocked tree or whatever it might be, or pulling a skeleton out that you hung on the front door forever, that's part of the tradition, is the actual lead up and giving permission. One of the things that I think is incredible that you've done, and the benefit of an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, which I wish I would have had when I was in the early stages of grief. And I'm going to grab it because I just want to make sure that individuals know that this is something that you've curated. I mean, going through, and this document, which I hope all of you will go to Sutter Health Care at Home, Hospice of the Valley, San Jose, and find this and start going through, because it asks those great questions. Contributing to funds, preparing special traditional foods. Is it a one-person job, or can it be shared? And it's literally a checklist. And my family could have used it, and I know every family that I get to serve as a professional could use this. What are things, and how do you distribute? I think this is a masterpiece. Something usually like
Thank you.
Yeah, simplicity is incredibly important in a tangible and digital form. How has this been received? This inventory for the holidays, as you've referred to it, because the inventory is the action items.
And I think it's why the inventory is so important, is because you really do look more deeply. Is this something I want to do? Is it something I like? Do I do it out of obligation or tradition, because I feel like I have to? And so it's really making that list of how important is this to me, and if I don't do it, how will it make me feel? And I think Amy has an example of a family she worked with, and it was just a really beautiful example of how the inventory was used.
Amy, that's great, because anything that kind of brings it to life.
Yeah, I had a family who experienced the loss of a teenage son, and so the mom is a client, and she took the papers home, and she and her husband and their teenage daughter discussed what their expectations were, what was important to each one of them, and they used that as a template to go over and have a frank discussion about what this was going to be, what they wanted the holidays to look like, and what was important to each one of them.
Yeah, you need to do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to just say, losing a loved one, oftentimes we feel like we're losing our power. And so we want to gain some control back. So having this tangible form and going through it can make the holidays more bearable when everything feels chaotic and so out of control, that you really can prioritize and look at, well, gift buying. I don't feel like going into the mall where they might be streaming in holiday music that, triggers an emotion. So I'm going to give gift cards this year. And I think that form allows people to see it differently because it's on paper. Again, it's not just the thought process. They can look at it and then have an easier way to discuss with their spouse or their parent, whoever it is in the family they want to include in the discussion.
And a lot of times it's challenging for clients and their families to talk about feelings, and they don't want this big heavy discussion about feelings, and this makes it a little more structured and a little more objective for them. Especially men tend to not necessarily want to delve into feelings, so it's
let's bury that. Let's put that right. let's put that right under the rug.
Right.
Yeah, we don't need to touch on that. We're just gonna plow through.
So they like to have a tool, a tangible tool, like Kristina said.
Yeah, I one of the ones that stands out to me on the list is holiday parties. But then you mentioned, all of the things that come into it. Because if you're going for shopping, maybe stuff and things isn't it, or maybe stuff and things and buying gifts is fun, but maybe you walk into that place and you hear that song, right? And you're like, because it's going to capture you. And I think if you've gone to Costco at any point in time lately,
it's there.
It's there. So you can't.
There's trees. There's ornaments.
Yeah.
There's everything. Toys to buy for the kids.
We're ready to celebrate. But a huge one is the holiday party.
Yeah.
And and it's not just the Christmas or the Hanukkah, the Kwanzaa event. It's the other things that lead up to, like, hey, we're going to go to something for work, and all the kids are going to be together, and they're going to be dressed in costumes for Halloween. But it touches on that, so you can have that conversation in advance, so you're not caught off guard. You've had a lead up to saying, I know that this is happening, as opposed to just walking in the whirlwind of emotions taking over. If someone doesn't utilize this, which I hope you do, I've shared it with my family, and we were looking at it 5 years in the past, saying, gosh, this would have been a great conversation, because we changed everything instantly with our loss.
And many people do.
And not with a thought process. We just didn't want to do, so we didn't. And then we just disrupted everything, and then none of us knew how to feel. Yeah. But so in my particular case, or the majority, which is not looking through this thoughtful inventory of items and holidays, how would you help and coach somebody that finds themselves in the midst of that?
I think it's, if they don't want the paper tool, we do it verbally. We ask the specific questions and have them prioritize with us. Because some people don't feel comfortable, they don't need the visual, they want to talk through it. So I think, for my clients, it's just really asking them the questions. What do you feel is important? Are the holiday cards important? Are the holiday parties important? The hardest thing about the holiday parties is walking in alone for someone who's lost a spouse. I don't know how I'm going to feel walking in, seeing all these couples, and now I'm single. And so what I always suggest is it's okay to say maybe. You don't have to have the yes answer all the time. You may decide that day, you know what, I have the energy, today's a good day, I think I can go. So again, I think that's part of the permission giving too, that we can put aside all those perfectionist tendencies that we have
Right.
Around holidays or any time for that matter, and just be how you need to be in the moment, because part of it is feeling the emotions too. The grief doesn't go away.
Right.
It's always with us. And so if we tried to say, this is holiday season upon us, grief's going over here in a box, it doesn't work that way.
No,
It's
no,
going to find its way.
it's
to
incredibly
trickle in.
heightened. Yeah.
And again, all those triggers are everywhere. Stores, songs on the radio, walking into a doctor's office. You may have a doctor's appointment, dental appointment, and they're playing holiday songs. Just like I said, that trigger where you didn't expect it. So I think it's just knowing it's okay to say maybe or even no.
And then to piggyback on that, it's helpful if people do decide to attend that holiday party, that they drive over alone, and that way they can leave if they get there and are
Right.
overcome, that they have kind of an escape plan.
Right. They're not beholden to somebody else that was planning on going and staying and closing out the bar or the event, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm stuck here. In this day and age, we should never be stuck. We're a button on an app away from getting out of where we are, and hopefully safely. But we do have a FOMO culture, that fear of missing out, which also goes in like, hey, I'm supposed to be represented at this party with or without, and then without the inventory, you're living to somebody else's expectations of the way that maybe you used to be. And my wife shared with me recently JOMO, which I really love, which is the joy of missing out.
Oh,
And I
have not heard that.
I hadn't heard it either until recently, but in our need to be seen, need to share world of what we're doing and how we're doing it, I love the idea of the joy of missing out is maybe just being at home and on that holiday or on that momentous occasion, which is an anniversary or a first, maybe lighting a candle and being, having solidarity and just being with yourself or with your intimate family. How do feel families deal with others' expectations? Because that's on the flip side, which we just touched on. Someone else's expectations of us, and then also if you could talk about how you would prepare someone that is walking into that environment, and do they talk about their loved one, and how do they prepare themselves if someone does or doesn't? Because sometimes we want someone to ask and we don't know how to bring it up.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple that I was counseling who lost a 5-year-old daughter, and Halloween was right around the corner, and they didn't discuss with each other the expectations that they each had for Halloween, and he wanted to receive trick-or-treaters, and he thought that would bring him joy, whereas she just wanted to close the house up, keep the lights out,
No ringing, no knocking.
Yeah. No trick-or-treaters. And so when that night rolled around, they had very different expectations about what that was going to look like, and it resulted in kind of a huge blow up. So it's really important to communicate about those expectations.
Right. And maybe if that conversation on an inventory list is had, maybe that child gets to go to somebody else's house and do that. And maybe one of the parents goes, or whatever the mix is, but you have that thought process before, so that maybe everyone can have what they need and not everybody has to live your grief, because we all do it differently. And sometimes we're thinking, well, I'm going to be sad over here and I need this world to be exactly the same, and we need to respect that everybody's doing it differently. And age has an incredibly important aspect, especially if someone's youthful, very young. They've maybe flipped that switch to, I don't really understand or identify with where mom and dad are, so I want to just continue to do, and I also don't want to feel bad about that.
Right. Yeah, so it's managing all of these expectations that can be really challenging.
And I think minimizing stress. People mean well. So when they're trying to be encouraging, you should do this, you should go to your work party, or you should decorate, you should answer the door for trick-or-treaters, you should cook the turkey on Thanksgiving, they're not recognizing all the emotion behind that. So we really want to change those shoulds to wants. I'm hearing that I should do it, but do I want to do it?
Right.
And I think, again, no one's being ill-willed and trying to be insensitive to the loss. It's, if you do this, it's going to make you feel better. But that's not always the case. And so I think it's looking at it from that standpoint. Okay, the turkey. What would Thanksgiving be like if we didn't do the turkey? You know what? I'm okay doing Chinese takeout this year.
Yeah.
That's what Dad loved, so we're going to have that meal instead. And maybe next year we'll go back to cooking the turkey. And so again, I think it's looking at shoulds and having a different spin on what that means. Really helpful.
I'm thinking of like it can get so into the weeds, and you can be so unprepared for it, because it could be, whether it's the turkey or the green bean casserole, you still have to go to a place. And if it's Mom's recipe, you're opening something up and you're saying, now I'm going to make this, and she's not going to be there. And I've always opened these cans.
It's not as good as hers.
Right. So you've got this expectation. You've got the other thing, which is now I've got to do it and I don't want to. Mm-hmm. And to our original, the beginning of our conversation, which was the permission. And that's what you are actively allowing people to do. The unfortunate thing is you can't knock on the door of someone's home and say, hey, you probably need some of this great information. And that's why we get to talk here today. And hopefully this platform allows individuals to find access, to realize that they need permission, they need to have a conversation.
And sometimes I think where the challenge presents too, we just commented briefly about young children in the home. And we don't want the kids to lose the joy. And, whether it's them dressing up for Halloween or decorating the house for Christmas, maybe making small changes so that there's still some tradition, but honoring your feelings as well. And really young children, of course, you're not going to be able to communicate that to. If it's a 2-year-old in the home, they're not going to understand, Mom or Dad's feelings. But if it's older children, to have those conversations, kids know what's going on. I think sometimes there's this feeling of, they don't know what's been going on. They don't know how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
They absolutely know and respond and can sense if there's something big that's not being talked about. So I think open communication with young children is just as important. And you can still decorate, but if you need to minimize, buy new ornaments. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's too hard to take out the ornaments that Dad bought every year, but we're going to do something new. We're going to do, favorite sports teams or something and make the tree look a little bit different. All of that would be okay.
So as we continue our conversation about embarking on our holiday journey, and I do want to remind others that if they haven't done this inventory in the past, it doesn't mean that they can't hit a reset button and enter into a holiday season maybe with better communication with family, which is what you want to do. I mean, you want to do it for yourselves, you want to do it for your family, you want to do it for the community. And Hospice of the Valley of San Jose, that's your goal. So what rituals might grievers do to memorialize and honor their loved ones during the holidays?
Yeah, we have some good examples of those.
Wonderful.
I am a bereaved mother. My newborn daughter, Alexandria, died. It's been over 21 years ago. And so the first Christmas without her, I was given a tabletop Christmas tree. And I had gotten some angels as gifts, and I had bought some myself as memorials to her. And so I decorated this Christmas tree, and this will be my 22nd year of decorating this tree for her.
How does that event, and because you have 2 other children.
Correct.
Where were they when, at what point in their lives were they? when the loss occurred of your daughter?
My son was just shy of 2, and then Alexandria was our middle child, and my subsequent child, Savannah, was born a little less than a year and a half later, and we call that a rainbow baby. And so they just grew up knowing that they had a sister, and of course my son was too young to understand, but as they grew up, Savannah would help me decorate the tree. Bryce wasn't as interested as she was, and so then as she got older, she was about 9, I think, and she experienced the loss of her pet guinea pig, so that opened the floodgates for her to grieve her sister that she never knew.
Right, she had an emotion attached to something she loved,
Right.
and we think of grief as just loss of. At least when I started doing this, it was just the loss of a loved one, and a child losing a guinea pig. That's a monumentous occasion. I experienced it with fish with my children for the first time. So how did that happen? What was her path to?
Then it was kind of challenging because we were 10 years out from the loss, and so I was in a very different place from my daughter, but we just allowed her to grieve, and I have a box of Alexandria's belongings, the minimal things that she had, the blanket, the little sleeper that she was wearing. It's in a Winnie the Pooh box, and it's a hat box. So we opened that up and looked through it. I showed her everything. I said, this is what your sister wore. These are photos of your sister. And so she just went through that grieving process. And she still talks about it occasionally, how it would be nice to have a sister.
When you bring the tree out, is it something that, if it's okay to ask additional questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it something that is, there's an occasion associated with it? Is it do both children come up and at this point in time, later in life, that's kind of an expectation for them too?
Right, that's
it's a living memorial.
That tree is there. And then the second, I believe it's the second Sunday in December. Each December is an International Children's Bereavement Day, and so people light a candle all over the world from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. their local time. So we incorporate that with the tree.
Oh, wow.
We light a candle and put her photo by the candle. So they've experienced that as well throughout the years.
It's in the photograph and the candle is in line with something that Pixar and Disney did recently, which I think maybe parents go and watch that movie and think that maybe this is an animated film, and hopefully, because it's usually, you go to an animated film and there's so much for adults to grab to, and there's so much for the children. But it's such an incredible story from the Mexican culture and saying, hey, your memory is kept alive by virtue of not just a photograph, but us telling stories. And if Alexandria didn't get to tell hers, you get to keep her light alive. And when does that event happen? That's new to me. It's something.
I believe it's the second Sunday night each December.
Wow. And it's specific to child loss, or is it
child loss?
Child loss.
It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The things that people don't know, and knowing that happens around the world in such a delicate season, that hundreds and thousands of people could be lighting candles for their loved ones at the same time. One of the things that would make you feel less alone. And I think that's one of your goals at Hospice the Valley of San Jose, is that a lot of people come in and they feel lost and alone.
Yeah,
And you want to guide them to the fact that you're not alone. Your grief is your grief, but it is and it is unique to all of us, but it is not unique to humans in loss.
And that's something we say. So we offer this Preparing for the Holidays in a live seminar form in October. And when everyone's seated in the room, we comment on that. Walking in, you didn't know anybody, and now we're all here together.
Yeah.
grieving various losses, but you aren't alone. Everybody in this room knows and understands how you're feeling. And again, there's no expectation of you're coming in happy and you have to do this and this and this. It's you just need to be however you need to be at this moment.
Right, you create a community. I was at the book signing event that you had, which was wonderful. And there was people that had met through the community, and maybe not a pair of individuals that would have found each other any other way, and they're traveling the world together because they found through loss that
They have some our support group.
They met at a support group. And I think, machismo, you touched on earlier, that maybe that helps to keep maybe men away from it. Would you say that there's more women that come to your support groups and bring families, or is it, what is that mix, and how do you get to those families?
You know, it's varied through the years. I've been at Hospice of the Valley for 15 years, so I've facilitated many groups. This is the first time I currently facilitate senior partner loss that I have half men, half women.
Oh, wow.
4 men, 4 women in the group. And that's just a nice balance because men do grieve differently than women, and it becomes a really supportive environment to offer tips and tools. I would say many of our groups are more female dominated, but we do have a lot of men come in, and sometimes it's just circumstances that preclude them from coming to group, but they come to individual sessions, time frame, another commitment on the night we have group. But over the years, yes, definitely more female dominated.
Absolutely. That's what they're searching for at that point in time, or that they're willing to search for it.
And women like to talk and openly share all the time.
Yeah, that's typically how women express their
It's a Mars and Venus thing, like we are different, cut from the same cloth, but definitely different species, right? I want to also touch on the other great side of the work that Hospice of the Valley of San Jose does for our community, which is actually leading up to loss, because that's also something that's happening. So you're wearing the hat of those that are preparing for a first holiday and with the person that they've loved and lost. And then there's also a large portion of what you do, which is individuals that are going to lose an individual. And hospice and funeral homes are scary things to people. And I think in our world of hatchings, matchings, and dispatchings, which an Australian friend and his mom shared that with me, and I thought it was beautiful. We do the first two very well. But then we fear individuals like yourselves because we're talking about this very difficult topic.
We're talking about a topic that's often avoided.
Yes, let's not do it. I think we should do the dispatchings part better as a culture and a society, and you're reaching out in advance. Is there things that you do to prepare, or do you have access to those families that are utilizing hospice service, preparing for loss, in this holiday season? And is there a different approach there?
So anticipatory grief, we offer that support as well. I think different approach where it's, a lot of times it's the fear of what if they die on Christmas, or what if they die on Thanksgiving? That's going to mark every holiday after that.
Yeah.
As the day Dad died. And so that just gets very confusing and chaotic, and so we can't predict death dates, and so it's really being in the moment and just trying to comfort and normalize those feelings. We don't want to minimize it and say, oh, it can't happen, because it's a possibility. But just trying to get away from that fear. I think that
it falls on the day, and then it is maybe doomed that day forever. But it might be better if we're just present.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
present
imagine.
with our loved one who's transitioning.
Yeah.
And present with our own feelings.
Yeah.
Right, as opposed to being consumed with how this is going to affect, because that's the beginning of being prepared for how we're going to grieve on that day, every day forward. And that would be what you would counsel individuals is be present. I mean, families call us and they say, gosh, we got to get everything done. And I want to help every family make them feel comfortable from my profession. But if they're calling and it's, that transition is close, we're here 24 hours a day. Be present and hold hands and say a prayer, do whatever it is that your family does, and create that as your tradition, especially during the holidays.
And another piece of that too is talking about living losses, because a lot of times we think loss is just death, when people, like for example, someone who's losing a loved one to dementia, they have the loss of the person's abilities prior to that. So they have losses along the way, not just the loss of the person physically. So we talk about those.
Oh, that is such an incredible thing. Thank you for touching on that, Amy, that people don't realize and how prominent dementia and Alzheimer's is becoming in our culture. And there's stages of loss through that. And that's actually one of the most difficult things a family can experience, especially without the support of someone to have a conversation with. Is that something that you delve into at Hospice of the Valley quite a bit? Is that something that's kind of growing in importance that you found at Hospice of the Valley San Jose?
I think our social workers and chaplains do a pretty good job of preparing the family members, and they do a lot of that anticipatory grief work with the families, and occasionally someone will need more than what they can provide because they're busy seeing multiple families. So sometimes they'll get sent to us, but it's more or less, wouldn't you say, a function of our chaplains and social workers.
We did start this past year a caregiver support group. So for any hospice family member that's a caregiver, Amy facilitates a one time a month support group where it is that time to talk about, some of those fears and what's going on with their loved one as they're on our hospice service. So that's another kind of way family members can access if they can't regularly come in for appointments because they don't want to leave their loved one, which makes sense. I can commit to weekly appointments, but this gives an opportunity. We can provide a volunteer to go out so that the family member, could come in for the support group.
I find that in our initial conversations and my connection with Hospice of the Valley of San Jose has been phenomenal, but it's really like peeling an onion, because as soon as we find something, you're like, okay, this isn't just, it's not all encompassing. It's not just grief and preparing, it's the caregiver, and you're mindful of the caregiver and making sure that we identify with that individual, or that you identify with that individual and say, hey, you're going to need support too. You're at home.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's just a huge congratulations to your organization and the great work that you're doing to make sure you're not saying, well, grief is this one thing and we're going to do it this way. Because having a group of other caregivers come together.
It's definitely not cookie cutter, that's for sure.
No.
That's for sure.
Is there anything different that you're going to do to get back to Alexandria this year? Is there, when does that tree come out? I know I'm jumping back to that, but it's just in my mind, and you've shared something so vulnerable that.
Yeah, the tree comes out when we go, yearly we go out and cut down the Christmas tree. My kids are back in the Midwest, so it's just my husband and me, but we get that out with the rest of the Christmas things. And then when I'm decorating it, I am reflecting on the times I got to give my daughter a bath. And when I saw her smile, she opened her eyes. And so I'm thinking back to she was only here for a week on Earth. So I go back to those memories that I did have during that week with her.
Wow. And that is another side of the grief, is that it's difficult for a husband and wife and partners to lose a child together. So there's a whole nother level of our relationship, and by the sounds of it, you have endured through that great loss and had a rainbow child, which is wonderful. I think that's a beautiful term that I've unfortunately I get to know based on my profession, but something that no mother ever wants to know. So my condolences to you for that.
Thank you.
So some other just rituals, one that I often share for families, because I think this is something that can be special for young children, is Christmas stockings. And so there's that question of, do we put the Christmas stocking out of mom? And so I always suggest yes, and as a way to kind of honor the legacy and the memory is have the children or any family member or friend write a favorite memory of them during the holiday season and to place it in the stocking. And then on Christmas morning or Christmas Eve, whatever day you know is most special for the family, you spend time reflecting on all those memories that were placed in the stocking. And sometimes it's things that people didn't expect that came up. You know, a friend might share a story from, you know, mom's childhood that nobody knew. And so it really just becomes then a special, intimate time for the immediate family to share those memories together and continue to have mom's stocking, you know, out by the fireplace or wherever it is.
Without having it just be this symbol of grief.
Yes.
It's also a portal to stories and reflection, because memory is not, it just doesn't, we don't just have that recall, it's usually triggered. So that's an incredible, I mean, if a Jewish family could ask for stories from friends and families and talk about it every single time they light a candle at night, you know, I just, but that is creating a new tradition. I have written that one down because we talked about that over coffee, and I love that. Share that with my family, and we'll reach out to my family's community for those stories, so that we can hear them, because you know they evoke laughter and tears, and both of those are incredibly wonderful human functions that we need to embrace.
And another personal one that it could be done with adults and children. One of our colleagues, Jillian, who facilitates our children's program, we did this activity last December in facilitating a girls' workshop. They were 12-year-old girls. And you buy like a clear plastic ball ornament that they can decorate and fill, you know, feathers, those pom-poms, glitter. That's a big thing with children. But in between all of the stuff that's placed in the clear ornament, they can write a message or a note to their loved one and roll it up and stick it inside that ornament, and no one has to read it. But it's their feelings, their emotion. It could be a memory what they're missing about their loved one. And it's just more of a personal touch that sometimes there's things we don't want to openly share, and that's okay. But being able to write that message and then close it and seal it in the ornament, and that ornament is on the tree every year. And that's become just a very special way for children to honor their loved ones too.
Absolutely. The therapy of journaling, writing something down. I mean, there's a hugely impactful on so many occasions. Things I didn't get to say, things I wish I would have said, a memory that was just you and I. Those are incredible. And then I think if the earlier about the stocking, if you're inviting other individuals into that, you're actually allowing them to have an opportunity to have reflection to the loved one. Which, back to that Coco thing, it was like keeping that story alive, keeping that light lit and that memory.
Because you fear people are going to forget.
Right.
I'm missing this person so much. I don't want other people to forget they existed. So saying the name and sharing the memories and having the conversations with family or friends that this is a difficult time, but it's still so important for our connection to our loved one to have those memories shared.
Right, and it doesn't have to fade. Some we'll do this first year, but if it then grows, and it grows because there's more memories and there's more stories, you know, that we need to share. As it relates to the loss of a child, is there things that you could allow your two children? I mean, they've had this incredibly difficult loss in their life that they weren't even there to appropriately grieve as children, and they've grown up knowing that there's that the sibling or best friend that they might not have had. And even in that, just, writing a letter to them or writing a note, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, they've done that. I think Savannah has written about, I think she entitled it The Little Blue Box, referring to the hat box, and the talks about the sister that she never knew. So she has written about it. And then we also encourage family members to maybe make a favorite dish of the person who passed, and to get a serving of that, they have to the family members have to share a memory in order to get that together unless they share. Exactly. And so sometimes that can be painful with child loss to prepare that meal that the child liked. So of course it's about communication, going back to the communication and setting expectations and what one parent versus the other is going to be comfortable with.
Yeah, but that's, again, that inventory in advance. Are we having a conversation because I want to do a thing and I think it would be beneficial to me, and as a husband, wife, partner, I want to make sure that if we endeavor to do this, that we've had a conversation and we're prepared. Because just knowing that there's going to be emotion that's evoked and having that knowledge of, okay, as opposed to just saying, oh, do whatever you want to do, and then you show up and fall to pieces, or the other things that happen with grief, which is anger's an enormous part of it, and it's
anger and guilt.
Anger and guilt. Yes, we have it when we are walking the earth, and then it manifests itself in different and sometimes ugly ways through loss. But I believe that if more people inventoried these items going into the holidays, I think they would be ahead of the curve.
I think so too, and I think acknowledging that we grieve differently, especially with bereaved parents, but among everyone in the family, like, okay, we're going to grieve this very differently, and just putting that out there and making that known that, okay, that's just the understanding, and I'm going to honor the way that you grieve while honoring my own grief, and just have that grace that I'm going to understand that you're doing it differently.
And I think it's gotten better over time, still some avoidance, but I think people are better at communicating about the loss, open to sharing feelings, because really what it's about, the reason we grieve so deeply is because of our capacity to love. If we didn't have love for somebody, we wouldn't feel awful when they die. And so I think having a different understanding of why going through the grief process, going through the journey is so important, because if we avoid it, it's going to find its way. And I think we hear that, sometimes we get those phone calls, well, it's been 2 years and now the holidays are upon us and I'm so overwhelmed with grief. I've had this grief surge that I didn't expect because I've just been so busy and I've avoided it. And we can avoid, but the only way is going through the pain. And I think there is a better understanding of that, and people access services sooner so that they can have an understanding that this is a normal reaction to grief.
I love what you said about the love, though. Because if we didn't have that capacity, I mean, how unfortunate would it be if we didn't have capacity to love? And there's a yin and yang to this, that on the other side, if we do have this ability to fill ourselves with love and memories, that we also need to go through that path. And just the skirting it never ends up helping anybody. Someone in the future says, gosh, I wish my dad would have let me cry. And I felt like I shouldn't have cried because I was supposed to be stoic. But then that, again, the permission that we spoke to. It's okay to have that emotion for anyone, regardless of gender. That is it's a biological part of our makeup.
Yeah.
The tear ducts
We all have
exist.
feelings.
Yes.
We all cry.
Yeah, but I think that happens. They're like, well, gosh, I'm not supposed to do this because I'm seeing. And then to the point of like how our children see us do things, they see everything. You know, they can feel tension in our homes. They can feel all of these things. And if we don't give it a name or create a conversation around it, we're not teaching to our children that it's okay.
About that. I have had parents say, I can't have my children see me cry. And I said, that models like valuable coping skills, that it's okay
Huge.
to cry.
Yeah.
It's part of human existence. Them seeing you cry is not going to be damaging to them. But you telling them it's not okay to cry, that's going to be more damaging to them.
Yeah.
So it really models healthy coping. You can just be open. I'm really missing Daddy today. That's why I'm sad. That's all you need to tell them. You don't need to go into every detail of what triggered that response. But I think, again, understanding we don't have to avoid or not share our tears with children or even adults. I mean, I think there's some situations where people want to avoid it if they're at work or something. And I think there's certain situations where it's removing yourself if that's too overwhelming. But if you're at home, let it out.
Yeah.
Because that's actually more healthy than holding it in.
Yeah. I don't know what it was in our society forever that, like the Superman cape or the cape, has never come with tears. But, maybe modeling our superheroes and showing their vulnerability is something that we also need to share, because we watch this and we see these things in our culture. And it's like, oh, here's the big and strong, and that's what we need to. But on the other side, we have this human capacity that we should never harness. It should be unbridled to just say, okay, this is how I felt about this person. As we've talked about a family or a parent not showing their child how to grieve because they said, hey, I don't want my children to see me crying. Can you share other sides of that and how we can prepare our children, not just that it's okay to cry, but sharing how that grief is, how that they can internalize that grief or their perspective?
So I think, like I said, it models healthy coping if they see you cry. But the flip side of that is to communicate to the child that they don't need to manage that emotion for you or take it on, that this is their responsibility to fix or to change it, or that these feelings are their fault. I think naturally children, oh, Mom's crying because of me, or I didn't do this, or I didn't give them a hug when they were, emotional. And I think just to say, Ma, I'm going to be okay. I'm sad because I'm missing Daddy, but you don't have to take care of me. I'm okay.
Yes.
And having that conversation that they know you're okay, and this is kind of the natural part of the healing process. But it's not something that they did, not something that they said, because I think kids can think in their mind, if I bring up Daddy, is that going to make Mommy sad? And that's not the case either. And so just making sure that they're not taking responsibility for your grief and for your feelings, and how they're manifesting at that moment.
Right, they're their own little humans. They're going to internalize, and I think a child is going to go very quickly to the place where they're saying, if Mom's upset, it's my fault.
Yeah.
And we just, not only do we need to show them that it's okay to grieve and to have tears and to have emotion, but that also it is not their responsibility, as you've said. I think it's paramount.
And for young children too, their grief looks different because they sometimes don't have the words to be able to articulate how they're feeling like adults do. So a lot of times theirs comes out in play. And so it is very different if they're seeing, they're not coming up and saying all the time, I miss Daddy. It comes in doses. They'll have those moments, but a lot of those feelings, anger, sadness, comes up in their play.
Right.
Imaginary play, running on the playground, anything like that. So again, they don't oftentimes have the words like we do as adults, so they do feel like it's something that they said or did.
Yeah.
Because their minds are still growing.
I mean, I imagine you ask individuals, how does that make you feel? And even as an adult, I'd still like a wall full of words that I could pick from.
Yeah.
That one, that's the way I'm feeling.
This is my feeling space today.
Yes, I need to identify with that word there, because even we have a hard time articulating, because we go to like the, angry, sad, all these other, but there's so many other words out there that can better capture how we feel. But even as adults, we don't have that capacity.
I have my, if I'm checking in, how was your week? What happened? I don't know. I can't tell you how I feel right now. And that's okay.
Yeah.
They don't have to have an answer, but it's just exactly what you're saying. Sometimes they can't put a feeling to it at that very moment.
Yeah. A loss for words. Well, I am thrilled to have had both of you on the Guiding Grief podcast, talking about holidays, preparing our valley. I mean, your reach is those that are willing to seek the help and guidance through the tumultuous times that can be the holidays without someone. And it doesn't mean that if you're listening that this is your first year, and if it's not your first year, then you can't come and seek out Amy and Kristina's help.
Yeah.
I mean, you might need it 5 years on, and you've been, or 20 years in, and you've said, I never dealt with that. Let's get an inventory checklist and talk to someone who cares and is compassionate. And there's a lot of wonderful individuals out there, but Hospice of the Valley of San Jose is making an enormous impact and reaching out to its community. There are some fun questions as it relates to fun. Maybe I should scale back on that. But just kind of a quick round of questions, because as a funeral professional and having life celebration homes and trying to find a better way to communicate, there's things that people think of, and I think it's important to have those conversations from my end as a funeral professional. Say, what are those questions and how can we get there and make people feel better about that. And you're individuals that deal in a difficult world, so they're brief and it's kind of quick and rapid fire. But have you thought if you would select burial or cremation, either of you?
Cremation.
All right. No wrong answer, by the way.
Yeah.
And would you have a service? No service?
Service. I think
Right.
it's important for the loved ones.
To have pause and to share stories.
To be able to reflect upon that. That's part of their process.
Yeah.
I'd have a celebration of life. I'd want it to be
Jovial.
uplifting and bright colors.
Yes.
Good
No one's wearing black.
music, Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Toast to some champagne and sharing stories.
Yeah. That you were here.
Yeah.
And you did good work on this earth while you were here, and we need to.
Yeah.
I'm obviously on the celebration side. I think that life needs to be celebrated, whether it was taken from us too soon or whether someone lived an incredibly long life and they get the blue ribbon at 90 plus years old because you made it. That we need to take pause, whether it's 5 people or 500 people. We need to have maybe an intimate setting where that toast happens, or whatever that family's tradition might be. If anyone could preside over your service, living or dead, who would that individual be?
Oh my goodness.
We've had the likes of Bob Marley. Another one was Christopher Walken. One was Dad.
Pink.
Pink?
Mm-hmm.
I love Pink, right?
Yeah. Love her.
Yes.
Good energy.
Yes, absolutely.
Strong female.
She is an advocate, right?
Yeah.
She's an empowered woman. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
That's
I don't
okay.
know that I have an answer.
We can put it in the notes after. If you think of it and you're like, this is the individual, we'll put it in the notes.
Who would it be?
And then this is something that is near and dear to me, and I think sometimes we don't identify with how important music is. But is there specific songs that you have heard in the past? And just so you know, I have a life celebration playlist on my phone. And I've had the conversation in past podcasts because my wife doesn't, if it's me that goes first, she doesn't want to mess up the music. She's like, this is important to him, so important to him. I'm so glad that he's written it down. So is there a song maybe that you dance to at a wedding or something like that you'd want to make sure that you knew was part of your legacy?
I really do like Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Yeah?
Yeah. And I like Tears in Heaven, Eric Clapton.
That's terrific songs.
Yeah.
I think it's great because whenever you hear those, there's always emotion that's associated with them.
So mine's going to be a little bit different.
I like it. In line with Pink.
Yeah. Anybody that knows me well knows that I'm a huge Dave Matthews Band fan.
I love it.
So Two-Step, because there's a verse in there that says, celebrate we will because life is short but sweet for certain. And I feel like that's how I live life.
Wow.
Day by day.
Dave, I wish I could close with your music on this podcast because that is an incredible lyric and one that is near and dear to my heart. And for any DMB haters out there, I think you should re-listen to Dave's lyrics.
I would agree. You may not like his vocals, but his lyrics are very powerful.
Yes, and all the other instruments in a company that make the beautiful music that's Dave. I've been actually listening to a lot of Dave lately, and it just always brightens my spirits to hear his music. Thank you again, Kristina and Amy, for being here. I want to make sure.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Guiding Grief is the beginning of a community where I'm trying to figure out a way to reach out to the community. In Hospice of the Valley of San Jose, a division of Sutter Home Care Care at Home is doing phenomenal work. I'm honored to have you on, and I look forward to speaking to your constituents and other individuals at Hospice of the Valley and their specialties and communicating to not just our valley, but anyone that's listening that knows that grief is real, and if it is not met with thoughtfulness and mindfulness, that it can be all-consuming. So instead of derailing your life trying to stifle something, open your hearts up to the feelings and emotions that your body naturally has and allow yourself an opportunity to walk in the door, which is an enormous step, and say, hey, I'd really like to talk to somebody. Because in my experience, Amy and Kristina and your entire team at Hospice of the Valley of San Jose is both warm and kind and thoughtful and wanting to do good work. Right? Only 15 years?
Yeah.
Only 15 years. And how long have you been there now, Amy?
A little shy of 2.
And bringing your enormous heart and your loss, which I'm really grateful for you sharing today. And I hope those that have had that experience can take your strength and know that they can create new and beautiful things that they get to do every year for individuals that they've lost. This has been Guiding Grief with Hospice of the Valley, a division of Sutter Care at Home. And we are here with Kristina and Amy, and we're grateful for you listening today. And please be kind to others. Our world needs it, and you deserve it.